All right, so we are live again. Unfortunately, we were interrupted the last time, so if you were watching the other one, sorry about that lengthy sidetrack. Mike, as we were trying to get you back, I did continue on to discuss a little bit more of the episode, but now that we have you back, what were your thoughts on Vince versus Joe in that whole discussion before the challenge?
Probably not much different than what I think you would have said. I actually liken that discussion more to Vince's comment after they lost the challenge when he said, you know, Joe and I are like the Cold War, missiles pointed at each other. And the reality is, Vince did all of that. Like, Joe had no intention of pointing missiles at Vince.
Mm-hmm.
And Vince drew this line in the sand that said it's going to be me or you, and forced, not necessarily forced, but caused Will to choose to show his hand early, as opposed to just going with the flow one way or the other, because Vince kept drawing it as like, we can't do what Joe says. We've got to be. It's us three against those three, and Will's kind of like, well, that's not a good situation. Let's just get rid of you because you're being obnoxious.
Well, yeah. So what I kind of
my feeling on it was that Vince did all of it. That was the summation.
Yeah, I agree 100%. Vince has displayed a couple of times now, which qualifies, I think, as a pattern of behavior. What he does is he gets so intense that he kind of ends up bullying people into just telling him whatever he wants to hear, at which point he can tell that that's what they're doing, and so therefore declares them not to be trusted.
Right.
He did it with Jen last time. He did it with Joe this time. And, of course, those are the two people that he wants to get out now because he can't trust them. Because when he demands...
He bullied them.
Well, right, yeah. It's kind of like, he puts people on the defensive and then questions their loyalty on the basis that they're defensive. So... Yeah, I agree with you. I think that to the extent that they were in opposition was all because Vince decided that they were and then acted accordingly, and then Joe's kind of like going, what is this? Well, okay. So yeah, that was definitely my assessment too. But in the meantime, we've got kind of a loose 3 versus 3 right now. Certainly with Will being the wild card there, as he proved to be later as well. But Joe, Hallie, and Jen seem like they're pretty tight. They all kind of agree that Vince is smart but kind of paranoid and potentially even dangerous. Although when I think it was Jen who used that word, what she seems to mean is in the context of the game, because he might do unpredictable things. But, again, you don't want to jump to conclusions about people necessarily, but I almost feel like he strikes me as the kind of person that I would really want to avoid in real life, too, on the basis that he might do something unexpected and dangerous. Not necessarily violent, necessarily, but I just mean he sends off all sorts of little red flags and alarm bells in my head. There's just something about him.
Oh yeah.
One of the things that he said about that in the interview is that he's a fan of the show, and so he can appreciate what the producers are doing when they put together an edit like that has a narrative that shows him as being, jealous and intense and all that. And so, knowing what he knows now, he might have chosen to express his intensity in a different way, and yet he wants people to be aware that he's not really like that. And in the meantime, he's coming across exactly like that as he says everything in this interview. It really felt like he was doing exactly this thing to Dalton Ross in this interview of saying, I'm going to say things in a way that encourages you to agree with me, and then I'm going to stare deep into your eyes as you lie to my face. That sort of thing. Now, it's audio interviews, so I'm speculating on the staring, but that certainly does seem to be his MO. In any case, I did not believe him when he said that he's not really like that. It seems to me that he is very much exactly like that, but maybe just doesn't like to think of himself that way, and therefore...
Yeah.
Yeah. One of the other things that I mentioned earlier was that he also talked in this interview about how it's not that he was responsible for creating the tension between Nina and the other girls, but when he recognized that there was a crack there, he definitely deliberately acted as a wedge and inserted himself in there to encourage Nina to believe that it was a more deliberate, malicious exclusion on their part. So he gave her, he listened to her, he was empathetic, he bonded with her and all of that, but also in doing so was, deliberate in his attempt to encourage her not to reconcile with them.
Hmm.
Which I also believe.
I definitely believe that.
Yeah. And he claimed that it was all about strategy, except that it doesn't that's how is that a good or reasonable strategy right now? I don't think it is. So it certainly didn't work out in his favor. You could argue that that's maybe a failure of execution rather than concept, but even still, it's not clear why that's a beneficial thing so early in the game, especially when it's still prior to the challenge.
Yeah.
It's not like they already knew they were going to tribal council. In any case, that brings us to the challenge. So, I talked a little bit about the challenge already, which I could summarize briefly if for you if you like. But what did you think about the water challenge?
I mean, I enjoyed it. I like that that it went back to a more of a classic challenge as opposed to continuing to try to, because eventually they would have run thin with the make a selection that's more white collar, blue collar, or no collar. Like it would have run out. So, and like we talked about last time on the show, I enjoy the premise and I don't want to see them overdo it. So to not try to force every challenge into that mindset was great. This was good. It was, and they didn't play up the theme at all. Like it wasn't like Jeff Probst was saying, oh, and the white collar is doing this, and they're good at the water part, and the blue collar will be better at basketball, or nothing, no nonsense like that. He left that alone, let it be a regular challenge, let it play out. I liked that. It was fun to watch. It had all the pieces that a good challenge has, which is that it takes long enough and there are enough pieces to it where you can come from behind. You're never really out of it, so the intensity was there. It was fun. Yeah.
I appreciated the bit of Dan insisting that he didn't want to sit out. He wants to do it. He's going to surprise everybody, and then actually succeeding in doing so.
Yes, I also appreciated that as well. He performed well, finished early, and then was actually very useful in helping his teammates up onto the platform. So.
Meanwhile, Vince, it's relevant to talk about how he did, especially since that was, relevant in the discussion of strategy later, in the sense of saying maybe we want to keep him because he is strong in challenges. He did do pretty well for his leg all the way up until the very end, when apparently he was having, I started to say having trouble getting out of the water, but I think it was actually that his float somehow got stuck on something. That seems to be what was happening there.
Yeah.
He seemed to be fiddling with it under the water rather than trying to climb out.
And I think more where the concern with him was when he took over to shoot the coconuts, and he was absolutely atrocious at it.
Mm.
You know, I think that may have been talking about him not doing well at the end.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, in fairness, Joe didn't do very well either at shooting the floats.
Yeah. But he absolutely crushed his leg of the first part. So, you know, it's...
Well, I think they're both relatively strong in the challenges today. So it's a valid concern, I think, to say, do you want to get rid of him, given that he's probably one of the stronger challenge competitors, just athletically.
Yes, if they were going purely on that, then Nina would have been the right selection.
Mm-hmm. So in the meantime, White Collar actually ends up getting first place, thanks largely to Joaquin being really good at the basketball shooting sort of dynamic. I thought it was a little bit ironic that ended up being the final part of the challenge, just given that Blue Collar had been kind of playing around with that earlier.
Yeah.
I wonder if they were thinking to themselves when they saw that, it's like, oh my God, we've practiced. We didn't even realize. So in any case, though, No Collar has to go to Tribal Council. Will is bummed / exhausted after the challenge. He seems kind of down, low energy. But of course, Vince starts going around telling everybody that clearly Will is deteriorating and he's worried about his health, which, although certainly we see him looking tired and maybe sad, I'm not sure we have really any other evidence other than Vince's say-so to say that it's any more than that.
Yeah, and I think ultimately this was the deciding factor for Will.
Well, yeah, it clearly ended up being, which this is one of the examples of why Survivor is such an unpredictable game, is because there are so many moving pieces, right? You know, because it's not even just that element that Vince had been saying that, but it was also just that Nina, just in the middle of the conversation, happened to mention, oh, by the way, I'm concerned about your health. And Will's like, what do you mean? Why? It's like, well, Vince said you weren't feeling well. Vince was worried you wouldn't be able to do well in challenges. And Will's like, what? I was all on board to move with you guys, but now I'm not so sure.
Yeah, those were his allies that he was working with, that he was going against. He was about to put himself out there and go against the trust of the others.
Mm-hmm.
And all of a sudden, the people he's about to put his trust into are out there, like, you know, and Vince is saying it so adamantly that his other alliance partner isn't even afraid to bring it up to him, you know?
Well, yeah, and I think in some ways it was not good gameplay on Nina's part, but I don't fault her for that so much.
Well, it wasn't because... Well, it didn't save her. It saved Jen, but yeah.
Well, if anything, it was more likely to hurt her because that's what the other alliance was trying to do, was vote her out. The only reason they split the vote in the first place is because they thought she might have an idol, which, incidentally, Vince also took credit for in the interview. Is he claimed he was responsible for them thinking she might have an idol. Who knows if that's true?
I feel like we would have seen some evidence of that, but...
He was saying, well, you know, they have you know 3 days worth they have to edit into an hour. They can't show everything. So maybe that's true. Maybe that's not. Who even knows? In any case, he did claim credit for it. But it's true also, though, that incidentally, we have some viewers, and we have Rachel R. who just left a comment saying, oh man, I have Slytherin t-shirt envy. So in any case, though, where were we? Oh, right. So we have Will, Joe, and Jen, with Will kind of over on that side talking about their plan to split the votes between Vince and Nina. But on the basis that Vince would be strong in challenges, their preference is really Nina. Excuse me. Is really Nina, with only just splitting the vote because they are worried that maybe Nina could have an idol, and they just want to, cut that off at the pass if they can. However, I thought it was interesting too, and a good indicator that they have their head in the game is that they recognize that Will is the one that's wobbly in that alliance. They say, he is spending an awful lot of time with Nina. And of course, their instincts are 100% correct right there, because it is precisely Will's discomfort with voting out Nina that is what leads him to initially be planning to do the other side, right? Like,
yep.
he might have been okay with voting out Vince, but he did not want to vote out Nina, and that's why he went back over to Vince and Nina. So I thought that was interesting. But of course, now, even though we had him in confessional earlier saying he wanted to get rid of Joe, now Vince is thinking, well, Joe actually is strong in challenges, so maybe we should get out Jen instead. And I can't completely decide whether or not to give him credit for strategic gameplay there. You know what I mean? It's like, is he really able to set aside his jealousy for recognizing the better strategic play, or is it really just that he also doesn't like Jen, and so he would just be just as happy to get rid of her because she can't be trusted either?
I don't know that it's an either-or situation. I think he didn't like both of them, and recognized at this point it's probably better to have Joe around than Jen.
Yeah.
So it was strategic in his selection between the two people that he disliked.
So in any case, that brings us up to this teeter-totter moment of Will talking with Nina, and her really actually being on board with the idea of voting out Jen, saying, "It will be my revenge," which is, again, interesting just because, although, again, we talked about this earlier, you could certainly argue that Jen had been inconsiderate, but at least based on what we saw, she hadn't really done anything that merited revenge.
Yeah, especially to the tune of getting voted off the show.
Yeah. Well, it's also true, though, that somebody's got to get voted off. You might as well... You come up with rationalizations for anyone that it might need to be, right? And so I didn't want to put too much weight on that. But at the same time, I have to wonder, what do you think was going through her head when she segued directly from that into, but what about you? How are you feeling? Now, I guess I won't... preface my question, just I'll ask it. So what do you think was going through her head when she made that transition?
I mean, I think it was genuine. I think she was just trying to figure out, because Vince was so adamant about his health that she must have picked up on the fact that maybe Vince thought that he should go because he might quit. Like, he may never have said those words, but that's the feeling I got from the way that she said it. Like, and the way that she connected it to who we're going to vote off was like, yeah, I would love to vote off Jen, except that I'm getting this feeling that you might need to go because you might quit. So reassure me that you're doing okay. Like, I feel like that was the train of thought that led them together.
Yeah, it might be that. The other thing that occurred to me was maybe it... See, I guess the question just is... oh, got a little dog behind me over there. The question primarily is just... She's trying to look for food on the coffee table is what she's doing.
She's become a bigger dog. She just has little legs.
Yeah. Anyway, I think the question is whether or not to give Nina credit for having strategy of any kind in mind at that point, or whether it was really just maybe a matter of sincere human emotion of, hey, I'm bonding now with my new allies. How are you doing? I heard you weren't feeling well. Are you feeling better?
Yeah.
It might have been that too.
It definitely might have. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. In any case, I wonder what she was thinking after his reaction, which was so very clear of just kind of, what? That was pretty amusing. I was just, it was such a quick, on a dime turn.
She was just like, wait, what? This doesn't make me feel comfortable.
Mm-hmm.
Because he was probably, okay, let's say, for example, that your interpretation is correct and she was just genuinely asking how he was doing. In his mind, he's probably connecting it the way that I did, which is, why is Vince that I'm feeling so poorly that I might be, that when people are thinking about who to get rid of, I'm coming up.
Yeah. Yeah. So anyway, that pretty much leads us into Tribal Council.
Yep.
I thought it was an interestingly Probst's take on what Nina had been going through. I thought was nicely nuanced, in the sense of certainly recognizing that she faces some challenges that other people don't, and we can certainly acknowledge that certain aspects of the game might be harder for her than for the others, but also pointing out fitting in socially is part of the game. We're not going to, this game is not about making things fair for everybody. It's if you're feeling like you're not fitting in socially, that's part of the game. It's not something that we have to make sure that everybody gets along. Being able to get along with your teammates is part of what the challenge is.
Yep.
In these days of internet text speak and so on, I feel like the idea of laughing out loud has become somewhat devalued, in the sense that people will say LOL or whatever because they think something's funny, but don't necessarily mean that they literally laughed out loud. However, I literally laughed out loud when Vince said he's trying to be the cohesive glue of the tribe.
I'm laughing out loud right now when you said what Vince said.
I just I have to wonder, was he just play acting for Probst in the Tribal Council, or did he really think that was true?
I think he really thought it was true. He seems incredibly delusional.
Yeah. That's my take. So I just definitely and then I also, I didn't laugh out loud, but I did really appreciate Joe's tactful handling of answering his next question, which was basically just to say, I think Vince will end up where he belongs. I felt like I knew right then what's going to happen.
Yeah.
So in any case, we have Jen, admitting that the tight three of herself, Holly, and Joe is real. And I really liked Jen in this Tribal Council. She's just very pragmatic and yet enthusiastic about the whole thing.
Yeah. Right. She's through the whole thing, and she's like, "Yeah, I mean, why would we deny it? I mean, we're the tight ones. And by the way, I've watched this since I was 8, and I still think that you're on TV."
Yeah. That was a lot of fun. She just seemed really excited to be there, and also just that idea of like, I don't think anybody is like, nobody here is stupid. At least, I don't think so. But just that idea of like, we're not going to, because that's true that in these tribal councils, so often it is the case that everybody knows where the alliance is, and yet they pretend that, we're one big group. We don't have any divisions.
Yeah. We're so in love with each other. It's like, no, just lay it out there.
Yeah. And yet it didn't cross the line to where, sometimes you have players who are just blunt to a fault, where they just feel like they need to just say everything out loud to the point where all the strategy is disrupted because they're spilling things that should not be shared. It was more just kind of like, well, hey, you're asking us questions about this because this aspect of it is obvious, so let's not dance around with that. So I'm really liking her as these two episodes continue. I like Jen a lot.
Right, and it also didn't have the other thing that could go wrong is that if you're in a tight alliance that you feel like is, I mean, she didn't necessarily feel that like they were more powerful, but when that happens, there can be an arrogance that comes with knowing that you're in a good tight group. Mm-hmm. And she didn't communicate any arrogance either. It was like you said, very pragmatic.
Mm-hmm.
Like this, yes. Probst asked the question, like, it seems pretty clear that you are together. Well, yeah, why would we pretend any different? It's not just two girls talking. Like, we're friends and we're in an alliance. That's how it is. Mm-hmm. And Joe is connected with us, so yeah, we're all together. That's it.
Yeah.
Not that we're better than them or, I'm going to tell you all the strategy. It was just,
It was also Jen, too, that kind of reiterated what Probst had said when he asked her about it, which is just to say that, like, she can feel compassion and try to understand better what Nina's going through, but also to recognize, this is a game. This isn't just, normal life where, like, she has no moral obligation here to make sure that Nina feels included if Nina is struggling socially.
Right, and that's where I think Nina's fault was. I talked about it a little bit earlier, but I'll go back to something she actually said, is that she's used to this in normal life, was expecting something different here.
Yeah.
Which, to have it laid out for her that actually it should be more the other way here. The social bonds and the delineation is actually more impactful here than in real life.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I think I read once that stress comes from when reality doesn't meet expectations. Like, every form of stress has to do with some sort of expectation that you have, and the reality of whatever situation it is not meeting it. And I'm not sure that that's universally true, but it's interesting to think about it that way. And so when you take it to this situation, Nina had this expectation that being on the no-color tribe was going to be so much more accepting than her normal life. And the reality did not meet that expectation by a long shot, because as they pointed out, this shouldn't be like that. This should actually, like I said, there should be more delineation socially here because of the game that you're playing.
It's explicitly a competition.
Right. So that's what led her to be extra stressed out to the point of tears.
Yeah.
Was that she had set unrealistic expectations for coming on this show.
Right. And that said, I don't want to completely let the others off the hook either of trying to be maybe more aware that just because there are some additional hurdles in terms of dealing with Nina's deafness does not mean that it's not worth doing so. You know what I mean? Like, perhaps she could be an incredibly valuable ally if you could get over that sort of superficial frustration that you have to repeat yourself sometimes.
Right. And thinking even more strategically, if you can find a way where that you're comfortable communicating with her now, imagine when you go to emerge and new people are going to be introduced to that situation, they're not going to be able to pull her over.
Mm-hmm.
Because they're not going to be able to communicate effectively with her because it requires a different touch. And if you develop that, she will be an ally for you because you will always have the upper hand.
Well, look at the way Vince was able to do that. She was the one that stayed loyal to him because he was the one that listens to her.
Correct.
She was loyal to him and to Will because they were the ones that made an effort.
Yeah, they were patient with her. They made the effort to communicate with her in the way that she needed to be communicated with.
Mm-hmm. Well, and what it makes me think of too, actually, is Dan over on the Blue Collar Tribe, who certainly has some abrasive character traits in the way that he speaks, and he's a little socially awkward too. But it might well be that he's someone that if they can just kind of get past that initial, difficulty, they might discover that he's actually he certainly showed himself as more capable in challenges than anyone would have expected.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe he could be a really great ally if someone would just kind of make the effort to get past that superficial impression.
Yeah, this discussion actually reminds me of something we go through like at work and when we're training like people not to do their job but like how to get into more of leadership roles and stuff like that. One of the things we always talk about is, what is the most effective way to communicate with someone at work?
Mm-hmm.
And the answer to that question is the way they want to be communicated to.
Mm-hmm.
That's what makes you effective as a leader socially or, trying to make all these things work is you have to find out what the person that you're trying to get to do what you want, how they like to be talked to or emailed or called or texted or what nuances in your way you approach them, like all of those things. When you figure out what they like and you mirror that, then you'll get them to do what you want. Like they will be your ally. That's the most effective way. So,
right.
It's very dramatic in Nina and Dan, but it's a very good illustration of that concept.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, it's also kind of the flip side of when people complain about, say, political correctness. It's the flip side of that in the sense that it might well be that, like, when you use a term and somebody gets offended and you sort of feel like, oh, come on, you're being overly sensitive, you're being too PC. I didn't mean to offend you, therefore you shouldn't be offended. And that's what, I think it's a very human nature type reaction to have in that situation. But a more value-added response would be to say, oh, I didn't mean to offend them, but since now I know that that term offends them, I will consciously not use it anymore because I don't want to offend them. So instead of insisting that they should not be offended because I didn't mean to offend them, maybe I will actually make an effort to deliberately not offend them so that we can actually be friends and have a conversation instead of shouting back and forth at each other.
Yeah, if you're the one willing to make the adjustment, you will be way more effective.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because they're not going to convince Dan to stop being ridiculous and making mildly self-deprecating jokes that are also over the top about how fat he is. They're not going to stop Nina from being deaf and sensitive about it. So you want to communicate with her, communicate within her disability, and don't get frustrated because the frustration, if you communicate with her in a frustrated way, it's not effective.
Mm-hmm.
So you want to be the person who can manipulate that part of the situation, yes. And in Survivor, you have that choice of, I don't want to deal with that anymore, I can just vote them off. But you also have to then manipulate all these other people, or I know manipulate has a much more negative connotation than what I mean in this, convince all these other people to do that. or you could just
Persuade. How about that? Persuade.
Persuade. Yeah. That's better. It's a much better way to put it.
Well, it's the positive connotation, I think.
Yeah. You're doing the same things. You're just doing it with a positive, connotation to it. So, which again, it reminds me why I love this show, is that it reminds me of all these things that are in all of our everyday lives and group dynamics, and puts it in this like just hyper pressure situation where you can see all those things. So it was awesome for me to see something that I teach people every day come to fruition in a very easy to identify situation. Like, wow, like these people are. This is exactly what I would tell you if you were trying to lead a team. You should not do.
Mm-hmm.
And
sorry. Go ahead.
No, in reality, I would jump on Dan for he is boisterous and Nina is sensitive, and I do think that they should also take that same lesson.
Mm-hmm.
But to the others, you want to be the leaders in the situation, then you need to adapt to what the people that you have.
Mm-hmm. See, like just on that example, what Nina could have done when her feelings were hurt because they didn't ask her to go skinny dipping, what she could have done is given them the benefit of the doubt at first and then gone to them and said, hey, I would have really liked to go skinny dipping with you guys. The next time you do that, make sure you let me know because I would like to do it with you. And then they would probably say, oh, okay, sure. And then they would do it and it would be fine. Yep. But because she jumped to the conclusion that they had done it deliberately to hurt her feelings, she accused them of doing that, and then they were on the defensive because they're like, what? No, that's not what we were doing. Boy, she's sensitive. And, and again, people are emotional. You have to kind of make allowances that sometimes people do things out of emotion that they are maybe not ideally considered, and, that's human.
Yeah, everything I said in that little diatribe cuts both ways. Nina could very easily, while she cannot necessarily communicate exactly the way that they would like to because of her disability, she could see that they were having fun, they were excited, they came back, like Jen said, I was on this high.
Mm-hmm.
And walked into that high and said, how was that? And let Jen tell her, like, oh my God, that was so much fun, we did this, this, and this. And Nina could listen and be like, yeah, that sounds really cool. I want to try it next time.
Mm-hmm.
And they would say, yeah, definitely, come with us. Because if she had mirrored Jen's behavior of being really excited about what they had just done, then she would be in the more effective position. So it definitely goes both ways.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So in any case, I did also like Will having some good humor about acknowledging that he didn't do great in the water challenge.
The black man's kryptonite.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a shame to have that stereotype kind of keep coming true. I mean, there's certainly been exceptions even on Survivor, but it's certainly that's just it's kind of an interesting cultural pattern.
It is.
But in any case, I liked, though, that he was able to sort of acknowledge that with good humor, but also certainly be energetic enough in saying so that, again, it kind of disproves that whole idea initially that, oh, his health's just deteriorating, he's not in good shape, that sort of thing. And also,
it essentially eliminated that argument. I mean, what else are you going to say if someone says, well, Will didn't look very good in that challenge, his health's deteriorating, and his answer is, I'm black and it was swimming. Like, what else are you going to say? Like, you can't keep saying, no, you actually, outside of you being black, like, it was bad. He cut the argument by making the joke.
Well, and then I also liked that he went from there to basically just emphasize what everybody should know instinctively, but it doesn't hurt to be reminded, which is to say, doing poorly in one particular challenge is not a good reason to vote somebody out because, first of all, how many more water challenges are there going to be? He might be fine in every other kind of challenge.
Yeah.
And also, it's important that you be able to have someone you can trust. that's could be certainly argue that's way more valuable than someone who does well or does not do well at challenges.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he did phenomenal in the fact that in something that was funny, he eliminated any objection to his performance or his health, and then went on to say in a very intelligent way, how that doesn't even matter, that there's more to the game than that, and
right.
I really liked that. I thought he did very well in the way that he presented that.
Yeah, so I like Will as well.
Mm-hmm.
That brings us pretty much to the votes. We had it was interesting that I think we maybe would have gotten. You know what? I feel like I need to look up. I hadn't looked up the actual vote breakdown. But there's a little bit of a.
It seemed weird because Joe voted for Nina even though he was in the alliance.
I guess that's what I was not sure of, is who was the one that.
Yeah, it's the two girls and Will who voted for Vince.
Mm-hmm.
Vince and Nina voted for Jen, and Joe voted for Nina, which just looked random unless you know the whole backstory.
Well, I guess actually, yeah, it does make perfect sense now that I think about it, because what they thought the plan was to split the vote 2-2 so that Holly and Jen would vote for Vince and Joe and Will would vote for Nina. That's what Nina, Holly, and Jen thought the plan was. But Will was the one who was going to instead vote for Jen, like Vince and Nina thought, but then decided to vote for Vince instead, forcing it to go that way.
Right.
So really, everybody did vote like we thought they were going to, ultimately, except Will was the one that kind of shook things up by kind of triple crossing in this episode.
Yes. Not even kinda. He triple crossed.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So I thought that was this was a pretty fun episode, and I've definitely got some early favorites in this, just at least in the sense of people that I enjoy watching. And I'm kind of glad to have Vince gone because he made me uncomfortable. Like, not even in a good TV way, but just like, I don't know, he set off creep alarm bells in my head.
Yeah, it's a weird feeling when you're like, I'm glad that this tribe went to tribal council because it forced them to, like, I don't want to say get real, but they had to get real. They had to. It couldn't be the no-caller, like, oh, we're all just going to have so much fun. Like, they had to become real people, and we had to see who they were. And as we started to see who they were, I like Joe, I like Jen, and I like Will. I don't have anything against the other people on it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that we would have known that had they not gone to tribal.
Yeah.
I don't know that they would have developed those personalities, and we would have started to see that we really liked them. So all of my favorites right now are actually on this tribe, and part of the reason is because they were the ones that had to go into this tribal council.
Mm-hmm.
Because we saw the white collar go to the first tribal council, and that one's kind of I don't want to say a joke, but it's a joke in the sense of trying to analyze where everybody's at, because
there was less personality involved in what happened that time.
Exactly. So you don't really get to know anybody. It's all based on, like, let's make the easiest decision possible. The first tribal council is that way no matter who the group is. And the blue collar, there's a lot of like things flare up and there's this, but you don't really see where everybody's going to draw that line in the sand because they haven't had to go to tribal.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't necessarily know how I feel about any of them, So, and the fact that they got rid of Vince instead of somebody I liked made this a satisfying episode in the fact that I got to learn all about this tribe. I got to develop some people that I really liked, and they got rid of somebody that is ultimately inconsequential. Like he was creepy in a way that you want to go and say, like, I wish he would stay around because he's good TV, but he really wasn't even good TV. He was just weird.
Yeah.
You know, he wasn't Coach. You know, he wasn't Philip. He's just weird in an uncomfortable way, like you said. Uncomfortable outside of the fact that he was on TV, you know?
Right, yeah. So in any case, I think that probably does it for this time. The preview for next time talked about the girls trying to go surfing, and then it sort of set us up to think something was going to happen related to that, but then it just changes the subject. It talks about the conflict over at Blue Collar, in particular, Mike thinking everybody else is lazy, and butting heads with Rodney in particular. What I will give Vince credit for, at the very least, is that in his final words, he did actually seem like a pretty good sport about it. You know, he was certainly interpreting it all as, well, hey, they recognized me as a threat, so it was a smart move for them to get rid of me, that sort of thing. Which, there's maybe some truth in there, and I don't think it's, don't need to begrudge him deciding to take it that way. But on the whole, he didn't seem mad or even really that upset about it. He talked about feeling like it was a great opportunity to come on the show. He was glad he got it. So, seemed like a pretty good sport, actually, about being eliminated. More so than I would have expected.
Yeah, when it comes down to it, like, he doesn't seem like a terrible person. He's just kind of weird.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah. All right, so I think that probably does it for this time. To anyone who stuck through our technical difficulties in the middle, thank you for that. If you are listening to the audio version, you'll probably wonder what I'm talking about because I'm going to edit out some of that stuff. Anyway, I think that'll do it for this time, and thank you everybody for watching and or listening, and we'll be back next week for more Survivor.